Our next presenter is the director of the Diploma Plus program at Charlestown High, and he will share a transformative way to think about grading. Please welcome Sunny Pai. You do need this.
About 8 years ago, I was standing on stage of the Grand Ballroom at the Lantana in Randolph. And the ballroom in the Lantana, it's opulently furnished. There's these sparkling chandeliers and deep red tapestries on all the walls. There's these silk curtains behind you on the stage. And I was standing there for the 4th graduation of the Media Communications Technology High School, where I'd been a principal. Now, the best moment of any graduation is when you hand out the diplomas. And we had a student who'd been profiled in the Boston Herald. She was graduating with honors even though she had almost dropped out in 10th grade. We had 2 students who had full scholarships to Emerson College. We had 2 Posse scholars. There were so many moments on that night when I just felt filled with pride as I passed out diploma after diploma. But there were other moments when I passed out a diploma to a young woman knowing that she had barely gotten D's for 4 years of high school. Or when I was shaking hands with my right and passing that diploma under with my left and thinking, I'm not really sure if you're ready. Where are you going to be in 5 years? Where are you going to be in 10 years? Now, that's not a reflection of our teachers. Our teachers worked really hard. Our teachers pushed our students. It wasn't about them. It was about our system. In our system, and in most traditional grading systems, grades mean nothing. Thank you, Maria. They mean so much nothing, I couldn't even remember them. So, anyway, so if you get a C+ in biology or a D- on this presentation, I mean, what does that really mean, you know? It doesn't mean that you're prepared for life. It doesn't mean all these things, but yet we're obsessed about these grade point averages. We're not really thinking about mastery. Now, when I say mastery, what I mean is students knowing something so deeply and so well that they have this confidence and they can apply that to other areas of their life. Students attend 4 years of high school, and some learn a little, and some learn a lot. Mastery is not something that we expect, and mastery is not something that we demand. So about a year later, I first read about competency-based education. Now, I was reading this research by Robert Marzano, and he was talking about the promise of grading by competencies. And the thing that caught my attention the most was when he talked about research by John Hattie. Now, Hattie had looked at over almost 8,000 studies on instruction and learning, and what he said was he said that if you graded by specific competencies, you could get a 37 percentile point jump in student learning. 37 percentile points. I had never heard of that before. And that's my D student crossing that graduation stage, crossing with an A instead of a D. Now, how could that happen? So the first thing you need to look at is we need to re-examine averages. When you look at averages, they're universally accepted in education. We just sort of take them for granted, but you never question them. If you did question averages, you might find some problems. So for example, let's look at this basketball team that has an average age of 19 years old. Or you might look at this river that has an average depth of 3 feet. You know, we cling to these archaic averages, and we use averages to describe what our graduates know and are able to do, but they don't really communicate anything. So let's apply this concept of averages to a different scenario. Imagine that you have this splitting headache, and you go to a doctor. So there's a clinic in your town, we'll call it the traditional clinic, and they have a little motto here: they really like doing things the way they've always been done. Now, when you go to this clinic, you have a choice of 3 doctors, and the way you choose your doctors, they'll tell you what your doctor's GPA was in medical school. So we have Dr. Bledsoe, She had a B average in medical school. We have Dr. Roeder with a C+, and Dr. Shrivastava with a D-. So who are you going to pick? I mean, most of us are going to pick Dr. Bledsoe. Why wouldn't you, right? Let's take a little bit of a closer look at their grades, though. So their grades were calculated based on these different categories and different topics in medical school. I do need to say that this is not how medical school really works. I come from a family of all doctors, and they would not be happy if I didn't tell you that. But we'll look at their grades anyway. Now, that splitting headache that you had was caused by a hairline fracture in your skull. So if you happen to pick Dr. Bledsoe, that's probably the worst of the 3 doctors you could have picked for that problem. My point is that these grade averages, they really mean nothing when it comes to competence or mastery. Now let's think about maybe going to a different clinic. We'll call it the Competency-Based Clinic. It's a really good name for a clinic. And they have a different motto. You can't work here unless you've mastered all that you need to know. They also have 3 doctors, and they also have information on them. Dr. Kennedy, competent in every area. She finished medical school in 4 years. Dr. Frederick, who's competent in all areas and finished medical school in 3 years. And then you've got Dr. Delahanty, who's competent in all areas. She finished medical school in 6 years. Now, if you think about what we said before, students attend 4 years of high school. Some learn a little and some learn a lot. These doctors we're talking about, they all learned a lot. Some of them took different amounts of time to do it, but they all learned a lot. And that's the kind of quality in a clinic that I would want. I'd want that guarantee of good service from these folks. That's what I want in education. I want that same guarantee of good quality across the board. Now, at Charlestown High School, over the last 8 years, we've been piloting different competency-based practices. In our in-house alternative program, Diploma Plus, we use competency-based grading exclusively. So you can't finish a course unless you achieve a B in all your course benchmarks. So if you have some Ds and some Cs, you keep working until every benchmark is a B across the board, then you pass, and that's how we guarantee that you're ready for the next level. We have other teachers in our mainstream school who've been piloting different models. One of the most ingenious and successful models comes from a teacher named Patricia Hagan. Now, Ms. Hagan read Marzano's book, and she came up with one of his systems and applied it to her class, where instead of taking an average of test grades to compute a quarter grade, she took the lowest test grade and made that the quarter grade. So if I got an A, B, and a C on my 3 chemistry tests in her class, I got a C on my quarter grade because that was my lowest level of mastery. But I could retake that test as many times as I wanted, and I could try to raise that grade and raise my level of mastery. What was amazing was that the students figured out that if they did their homework consistently, they do better on the tests. So her students went from doing 20% of their homework to 80%, but she did not collect or grade any of that homework. I know, right? Anyway, questions later, Benedette. So Lauren Brett's been teaching at Charlestown for about 15 years, and she reorganized her entire 9th grade engineering class this year to be taught around competencies. What's most amazing about Lauren is that she actually in real life witnessed that 30 percentile point jump this fall. She had students who were achieving at a D level suddenly jump to an A level when she was teaching this way. Now, if you know Lauren, she's this burst of energy, and she'll call me over and ask me to look at her complicated lesson plans that show how she's going to meet every student's need. And if you look at this, it is a lot of hard work. But there's also joy in these notes. There's a joyfulness in knowing that you as a teacher have a plan where you're going to give the chance for mastery to every one of your students. Now, this is not to say that we have it all figured out at Charlestown, because we don't. We have a lot we need to improve on. We have a lot we need to still do, but I think we're on the right track. And that's important because high schools are not really set up to do this kind of work. If you think about it, schools are measured on how many students we get out over 4 years. But mastery should not be a timed test. When you think of places where competency really matters, like think about getting your driver's license. Time's not a factor. You take the test once, you take the test 10 times. If it takes you longer, it's not like there's a penalty. You don't get a different driver's license just because it took you more time. School should be like that too. Forget cohort graduation rates. Again, I forgot them already. It's funny how those parts come up. But forget grade point averages, forget passing grades. That's not what's important. Students need to learn the deep value of mastery. We want our students to be skilled writers, deep thinkers, brilliant mathematicians or scientists or historical researchers. That's what really matters. If you think about it, when we have students doing this work, they push back on us. They don't like it. This kind of change is hard and it requires these paradigm shifts. I have students who tell me, just give me my D and let me get out of here. And I even had one student who sat me down one day and he said, you know what, I'm just going to wait. Because if I wait, you'll make it a little bit easier, and then a little bit easier, and a little bit easier, and eventually I'm going to be able to do just a little bit of work and I'll pass. Now that's how he learned to play the game of education. Now, our system didn't allow him to do that. And when he did graduate, he admitted that we had gotten him to learn a lot more than he intended to learn, and he had actually become quite a scholar. Right now, time is constant, and learning is variable. Competency-based grading flips this whole thing on its head, and instead, you see learning be constant and time being variable. It might take a little bit more time for students to finish, but they're going to leave prepared. And that level of preparedness is the only measure that we should care about if we want students who are going to be successful and are going to be able to compete anywhere. Thank you.